So welcome everyone. I am so excited about this professional development opportunity. We're so excited about the MathUP resource. First of all, it is a core resource, which means that it should be your number one go-to. It will be the one that we use across our division, but this is our core resource for Horizon School Division. All teachers grades 1 through 6 have this resource. And it's multi-graded. So if you teach multiple grades, then you have access to all grades, not just grade 2. So we love this resource for a lot of reasons, and it is a high quality resource. I would like to begin today by acknowledging that from Horizon School Division, our office, we are on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Métis. Our school division encompasses Treaty 6 as well as Treaty 4. So if you would like to make that land acknowledgement from wherever you are visiting us today, that would be wonderful. We understand the responsibility that we have and the agreements that have been made. Joining us in the room, we have Lana Steiner, of course. Jackie Bergerman is here monitoring the chat. We also have Heidi Linford joining us from the southern part of our school division. And so that's who we have from our literacy and numeracy team. And without further ado, I will turn this over to Lana.
Good morning, everyone. So the plan for today, in the fall, we took a look at the provincial holistic rubric, and we were looking at the assessment piece that morning or afternoon. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at how the instruction and the assessment kind of work together. And because MathUP has been chosen as the core resource in Horizon School Division, I basically kind of deconstructed the resource for you into bits and pieces that I think are really integral to having a foundational understanding of what a strong resource is and how that resource can support effective math instruction. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to start with a check-in. So I'll pop this link into the chat, and it's just a Jamboard. It's just asking you how you're feeling today as we get going. There's a lot going on between COVID and the weather, so I'll pop that in and then we'll take a look at it. Okay, kudos to you guys. Most of you are in a pretty good place considering everything that's going on today. Okay, even when I work with kids, I always ask kids in the morning, like, tell me where you're at. It just kind of gives you a sense of what's going on with kids, and then it kind of lets you know, how hard you can push or nudge with their learning that day, because if they have too much going on, then you know just to kind of pull back. Okay, so let's move forward. The way I encourage you, if you have any questions, pop them in the chat, and then at certain points I'll stop and Jackie will let me know what the questions are and I'll address them. Okay, so what I've done today is I've kind of embedded in videos into the videos from MathUP into the presentation. And then what I'm doing is I'm using them as kind of a launching pad to have a little bit more of a conversation, or I'll kind of comment on what's going on in those videos or elaborate or expand as we move throughout. Okay, so we're going to start with this first video here.
Because MathUP is a digital resource, it's kind of handy that there's certain things that are easier to do. And one of the things that's easier to do is to kind of move things around in a way that makes more sense for you. So MathUP is organized at each grade level by topic, and there are a set of, whether it's 18 or 19 or 20 or 23 or whatever it is, topics in that grade. And they are organized by strand, but we don't think that the right thing to do is to teach like all the number ones and then all the pattern and relational ones and so on. So teachers have to come up with a sequence that they're going to use to get through the year. What we've chosen to do is provide for you 3 paths that make sense to me anyway, that you might go this way, or you might go this way, or you might go this way. And we've tried to give you a little bit of a rationale for those paths. One of the important principles is to honor prerequisites, like there's certain topics you can't do until you've done other ones. One of the important principles is don't start the year with a bad news topic. Start with something happy and fresh. We've often suggested patterning and sometimes measurement, and sometimes it's a number topic, but with not heavy duty numbers, kind of softer numbers. So there are certain principles we adhere to. Some of them have to do with kind of coming back to things. So we don't want all of the things about number clustered together. We want to kind of spread them out, spread out patterns of relations, and so on. So there's a number of principles that were there that guided the 3 paths we suggested. That said, you're a free agent in the universe, and you might decide to move them another way because you know your kids and what works for you. And so you are totally free to drag and drop and move topics around and find a path that works for you. We're just sharing our principles in case they help you come up with your path. There's also the issue of teachers who have combined grades, and there are many teachers in our country who do have combined grades. And you have the grade 2 stuff you have to teach in the 3, or the 3 and 4, or whatever it is. And you have to figure out a path that takes you through this, but also through this. And one of the things we've tried to do is help you a little. So we've gone through all the combinations like 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, etc., to try to help you figure out, well, I'm actually saying to you, if it were me teaching, this is what I would do. And one of my principles in the combined path approach is that I want to teach the kids together as much as I can. So I don't want like those kids over there doing something and these kids over here doing something else, and I ignore them for a while and I ignore them for a while. We want to blend them when we can, and I've tried pretty hard to show you how that might look in a couple of topics very specifically, and then you would use those principles when you created your own class. One of the other things to probably pay attention to is that there are topics which I'm just going to say are more important than other topics in terms of kids moving on to the next grade and those topics being built on and so on. And I would propose that you don't leave those ones for June because then they never happen. So it seems to me that topics that you think are critical should be revisited a couple of times during the year and not left too late.
So there's a few things that I want to touch on that she said in that little 3-minute video. Okay, so MathUP is a digital resource. The benefits of a digital resource are that if you, as you know, when you go into MathUP, you can access any grade from 1 to 6 in there, right? So that really allows me to differentiate if I need to be able to differentiate. I don't have to leave the room and go find a print resource in another classroom. I can go into another grade right there. The other thing that a digital resource does is that if you go in there, whatever they've done, they will post, or whatever they've added or revised, they will post that on the dashboard. So if you go into your dashboard, they'll tell you this is what's new in MathUP. And so there's this ability to constantly refine the resource that is not, you don't have that capability with a print resource, because obviously once it's printed, you know, until it has a revised edition, that's kind of set in stone. So it's really interesting that way. And like I said, it allows you access to multiple grades. And digital resources seem to be the way that publishing companies are going. So Pearson has a digital resource in Mathology, Nelson has one in KnowledgeHook, and Rubicon has this in MathUP. Kind of why MathUP was the preferred choice over those other two is because it has the largest grade bandwidth. Mathology only goes up to grade 4, and KnowledgeHook is more for middle years. So that's a big reason why Horizon chose this resource, so that there's continuity and consistency, not only between teachers in each grade, but amongst different grade levels. So a path is simply a year plan. That's what she's saying there. You'll notice as we go throughout the resource, she sometimes attaches language to or labels to things that we refer to slightly differently. I don't know if it's in what exactly is going on there, but I'll make an effort to make sure that that's clear for you guys. The prerequisite learning, I'll point that out in the next little bit here so that you understand what she's referring to there. And then when she was talking about the combined grades, if you look at the Saskatchewan curriculum, in kindergarten, kids explore numbers up to 10. In grade 1, it's up to 20. In grade 2, it's up to 100. Grade 3, it's up to 1,000. Grade 4, 10,000. Grade 5, up to 100,000. And grade 6, beyond 1,000,000. So if I'm teaching addition and I have a 2-3 split, the only thing that's changing there is the magnitude, not the only thing that's changing, but the big thing that's changing there is the magnitude of the numbers. And so that's what she's talking about there. She wants to teach the same concept, but she's going to change or tweak the magnitude of the numbers based upon the grade level that she's teaching. And when she's talking about revisiting topics, lots of times in the math community, they refer to this as what's called spaced practice. And so this is kind of what happens um, a lot in math is we teach these outcomes in silos and we assess them. And when we assess the kids, that knowledge or that understanding is sitting in their short-term memory. And then what happens is when they don't have that space practice or those opportunities to consolidate that knowledge, it doesn't move into their long-term memory. So then that's why when they move on to the next grade, they'll go, oh, the teacher never taught us this. But really, the teacher did teach it. This is just what's happened. It hasn't moved from the short term to the long term with some of the kids. And so when you have space practice or you're revisiting those topics throughout the year, what you're trying to do is you're trying to help consolidate that knowledge so that it moves to the kids' long-term memory and retention isn't such an issue. Okay, so this is what we're going to do here. Let's take a look at this. So when she was talking about the rationales, this is where you go. There's right next, wherever she has an eye with a circle, you can click on those in MathUp and there'll be additional information in there. And in the paths part, she has the rationales there. So here, there's 3 paths for every grade. There's always an A, B, and C. And then she kind of tells you why she set up each path the way that she did. And so what you need to do is you need to read through that document and then you kind of say, okay, where does my thinking best align with one of these paths? So for example, like she said, some teachers like to start the year very softly. Other teachers like to hit the ground running. So depending on what your philosophy is about how you want to teach the curriculum, then you have some leeway there. So for example, too, you might be thinking about how your school year is structured. Like come December, maybe I have 2 weeks at the end of December. I might want to be doing a softer topic such as measurement. So then I design my year plan to reflect that. So as you read through the rationale, she's kind of sharing with you, these are what my thoughts were when I created each of these 3 paths. Now, what I would like you to do is in that PDF of those paths, I want you to print them off and take them. And so you'll have the path. I suggest using path A so that we're all on the same page. And what I want you to do is I want you to go into the curriculum and I want you to align the topics. So these are the topics right here with the curriculum. Okay, so I'll give you an example of what this looks like. So right there, I'm working on path A. And when I go into the skip counting, if you might want to have a print document there and you might want to have your resource open and you're going to click on counting. And when you look in the counting part and you look at the curriculum, you realize that this lines up with N2.1 and it lines up with the indicator of skip counting specifically. This is really, really important for grade 2 in particular because of how the grade 2 curriculum is written in Saskatchewan. Its structure is a little bit different than the other grades for whatever reason, and the outcomes are very large and there's a lot of indicators within them. Instead of having multiple outcomes, there's just 2 really big ones in number. And the other grade levels aren't structured that way. They're structured a little bit differently. So what we're going to do right off the bat here is I'm going to give you about 20 minutes. And during that time, I'm going to pop the link into to the curriculum into the chat. You're going to open up your curriculum. You're going to have your path documents there, and you're going to see how your curriculum aligns with this resource. And you're going to start matching. Okay, when I'm doing the topic of representing 2-digit numbers, what part of the curriculum am I hitting here? So which outcome is this matching up with? And you'll see that all of the outcomes are addressed through this resource. Okay, so I'm going to put myself on mute. Like I said, I'm going to start timing. I'm going to give you about 20 minutes, and you're going to do that independently. And then we're going to come back as a group, and we're going to make sure that we all were able to see the same things between the resource and the curriculum. Okay, so I know that you might not be quite done this task all the way through yet, but we're going to come back together as a group. If we were together in person, this would be much more enjoyable because we could have lots of good conversation around it. There's a couple of things I just want to make mention of. One of the issues that we've been having, and this has happened in multiple schools, multiple grades, multiple teachers, is that when they're having issues with logging into their MathUP, they're trying to log into the Ontario edition of MathUp instead of the national edition. And that's like 90% of the time, that's been the issue when people have been having login issues. And so when you're in the Ontario edition, you'll see kind of a mint green background. When you're in the national edition, which you need to be in, you'll see kind of this peachy orange background, and that'll let you know that you're in the right one. And then just bookmark that one. So because what happens is when you Google MathUp login, what comes up is the Ontario edition login. And you don't want that one. That's why the systems aren't recognizing the emails. And that's happened quite a bit in Horizon. The other thing I want to point out is right here, you'll notice, and the reason that the different editions exist is because Rubicon has done such a great job of making sure that each edition aligns specifically to the provincial curricula. And that's why those different editions exist. So if you notice right here in the national one, it'll say WNCP, and you'll notice in your topics on your paths page. So if I just scooch over here, I'll show you exactly what I mean. If I come over right here, so I'm in the national edition, and you see right here, this one says BC. So then I'm not attending to that because clearly we're not in BC. But I do need to pay attention to the ones that say WNCP. WNCP stands for the Western Northern Canadian Protocol, and Saskatchewan is a part of that. In the odd one, there's reference, you have to a couple that are specific to Manitoba as well. So just so that you know, like I said, here's some examples of some BC ones. You want the WNCP. Those are the ones that'll match up. You don't have to attend to the ones that have a BC label or a Manitoba label. The other thing I wanted to point out is if you look at this year plan right here with this estimating and comparing whole numbers, whenever you have kids, so if I'm teaching addition, lots of times you'll see in the older resources or in lots of resources that they put estimation at the beginning of the topic rather than at the end. I always advocate for estimation at the end of a topic. The reason that I advocate for that is the thinking of putting it at the beginning is that because those numbers are rounded, they're going to be easier for the kids to manipulate mentally, which is true. But if the kids don't have conceptual understanding of the concept, they can't manipulate those numbers mentally anyways. So I always say teach it and get that conceptual understanding and then do estimation at the end, because when kids are estimating, they're doing all of that, so much of the work in their head, right? And it's so abstract that they need to have deep conceptual understanding in order to do that. If you look at almost any textbook, they're often set up with estimation at the beginning of a concept rather than at the end. Math Makes Sense is set up that way, and I kind of believe that's a flaw in that program. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of take a look at this path and how it aligns with the Saskatchewan curriculum. Okay, so if you look, when you just look at the topic doesn't give you a deep sense of what outcome that might be addressing in grade 2 in Saskatchewan. So I just want you to double check and make sure that that your alignment with the curriculum matches what I have on my sheet. So I've cut the sheet into two pieces so that it's easier to see on the screen. So and I might be looking, because like I said, that N 2.1 and 2.2, they have so many bullet points within them. I might just be pulling out a specific piece of that one outcome. Okay. So when I look at counting, I'm looking at N 2.1, and it's the skip counting part that's in the counting section there. When I look at patterns, it's P 2.1 and P 2.2. So in that one topic, there's actually two outcomes embedded in there. When I'm looking at representing two-digit numbers, I'm looking at N 2.1 again, but I'm looking at representing, describing, and differentiating between even and odd. So all three of those things are in that one topic there. And then in the next part, I'm estimating, it's once again, N 2.1 is huge. I'm estimating with reference, and I'm comparing two numbers. And then the last one there on the upper half is N 2.2. So then what I've done is I've continued on, and you'll see, you can kind of see how I've looked at your path, or that path A, and I've said, okay, I understand this, but if I'm looking at 3D objects and 2D shapes, I'm recommending that those two should actually be taught together. And I'm recommending that based on how SS 2.5 is written in the Saskatchewan curriculum, which is over here on the right-hand side. So because it says, because they're talking about the relationship, I don't think that it would be easy to develop those connections in kids when you teach those in isolation. So I recommend that you put the two of them together, and that's a reflection of how our curriculum is written. So in 3D objects, and within that topic, you're teaching 2.3 and 2.5. When you're teaching length, you're teaching SS 2.1. So I put a star beside time because time isn't specifically mentioned in the grade 2 curriculum. And so I've quoted this piece where it says use direct or indirect measurement to solve problems. So I could be talking about a day, a week, and so direct and indirect isn't explicitly defined in the curriculum. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, and that one's open to a little bit of interpretation, just so you're aware. And then when you're doing money, the intention of money in grade 2 is to use it for skip counting. And then, so you're going back to N 2.1, you're representing and describing. And then when you go back to adding and subtracting small numbers, it's N 2.2. We already talked a little bit about 2D shapes and SS 2.4. And then when you're doing mass, it's SS 2.2. And then you're flipping back again to N 2.2. And then inequality, you're finishing up your patterning outcomes with P 2.3. And then you're looping back again to 2.2. And then lastly, you're doing your statistics and probability outcome. So you can see when you look at this this path, how she keeps on looping back to addition and subtraction. And the reason that she's doing that is because she wants that knowledge to consolidate over time, just like I spoke about earlier. Now, if there's someone who, the reason that I thought it was important to spend some time doing this is because a lot of resources do not align themselves tightly with Saskatchewan curriculum. And part of that reason is because we don't have a huge population base. So sometimes they'll align really nicely with Ontario, sometimes they align really nicely with BC, but they don't align as nicely with Saskatchewan. And so then what ends up happening is if teachers are following a resource instead of the curriculum, they may be teaching things that they don't need to be teaching. So they're doing too much work, or they may be missing some really important things. So they might not be teaching with enough of what the kids need in grade 2. And so the point of this was for you to understand, okay, this resource is very tightly aligned with Saskatchewan curriculum, and that's part of why it was chosen as a core resource. And the other thing too is to actually dig into the resource and kind of break it down to see how it does align, and to see that everything you need is covered in those topics, even though when you initially look at them, it may not appear to be that way. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the topic overview video. So we've taken a look at the paths, which is kind of your plan, and now we're going to look at the different topics within the path.
In this particular topic, we extend the work that students have already done with addition and subtraction with smaller numbers to larger numbers, in this particular case, 2-digit numbers. Students will focus in this topic on, I'm going to call them the procedures, like how do I get the answers, more than the kinds of problems you solve by adding and subtracting, although of course they will meet some of those in this topic. There will be a subsequent topic where there is more what I'm going to call problems. Now, in the course of looking at, quote, how you get the answers, students will use concrete materials, manipulatives, and they will also learn what we often call algorithms, which are procedures, including a standard algorithm, the one that most of us learned for addition and subtraction, as well as what we call invented algorithms or invented procedures, where students come up with their own ideas about how to add and subtract numbers. Many teachers inadvertently sometimes suggest to kids that, well, it's okay if you do these invented things, but really we want to get to the point where you don't want to do that anymore and you want to use the what we often call standard algorithm. It's really important not to message that, because there are actually times when some of those, what I'm going to call invented procedures or alternate procedures, are actually quicker and easier for students than the traditional one. So the traditional one is fine. What we don't want to communicate is that it's better than the others. It's just another one. Sometimes I talk to teachers or parents and hear some concerns about the fact that their child has to learn 5 invented procedures. And I want to emphasize that you don't have to learn 5 invented procedures. We want kids to have opportunities to invent their own. We want them to have opportunities to hear other ones that other kids invented. But the intention is not that every child master every possible procedure, because that is overwhelming and really isn't what we're after. So that's an important message for you as you're communicating with kids, and for parents to know too, because sometimes that's something that weighs on them. As I mentioned earlier, the topic of addition and subtraction will be addressed again in a subsequent topic. But this is a pretty important topic in grade 2. So there may be many opportunities during the year on days when you're not doing a MathUP lesson where you want to come back to addition and subtraction.
Okay, so there's a few reasons why I chose to share that video with you. The really well-developed resources right now, the ones that I mentioned earlier, they're not only resources for students, they're resources for teachers too. So what they're doing is through these videos, and whether it's MathUP, Knowledge Hook, or Mathology, they all have videos in them, and they're developing capacity in teachers. So they're explaining the background knowledge that teachers need to have in order to teach specific concepts well. And so if you look throughout MathUP, there are videos everywhere, embedded absolutely everywhere in this resource. So you can go as deep with your learning as you want as a teacher, or you can stay at a more surface level. But the one thing that I think is worthy of teachers' times is watching the topic videos, or the videos at the beginning of each topic, like that one. They're never more than 5 minutes, and she kind of tells you what you need to be thinking about as you teach this. And like I said, they're literally on average about 3 minutes. They're never more than 5. And they just give you a little bit of background information about, sometimes it's about misconceptions, sometimes it's about what to look for, anything like that she might be addressing there. Like in this case, she was saying, we want kids to have invented procedures, but we don't need kids to know all of them, right? So the reason why she's encouraging those invented procedures is because you want to take what the kids know or what seems intuitive to them, and you kind of want to capitalize on it and then help them make meaning and then grow the way to the standard algorithm. So the reason what she was saying is that you don't want the standard algorithm to trump those invented procedures is because lots of times in grade 2, in an invented procedure, when you're doing two-digit addition, you'll see kids start with the tens, and then they'll work with the ones. Now, this goes against the conventional algorithm, but when we do addition mentally, that's what we're doing. We're typically adding the tens and then adding the ones. So I don't want to devalue those invented procedures. I want to value them, because at the end of the day, mental math is always like kind of the pinnacle, but I need to get through the algorithm too. And so that's kind of what she's getting at there, even though she isn't explicitly stating that. You'll also notice as you work through the lessons that the lessons typically start with manipulatives and then they move to like the algorithms. When you look at high quality math resources, they always follow the progression of concrete, representational, abstract. So manipulatives, pictures, numbers. And that's a pretty key idea when you're working with kids and you're teaching math in a conceptual way, is you're typically going to go manipulatives, pictures, and numbers. For kids who struggle with math or it doesn't come as easily to them, all three of those are super important. With kids who where it comes a little bit easier, sometimes you can skip, like maybe I can go from manipulatives to the algorithm, or I can start at the pictures and go to the algorithm. But for kids who need a little bit more time, they need all three. Okay, so what you will notice on the right-hand side of the lessons is they will always say the learning goals. So she'll always have the learning goals of the lesson. So what I did was I took the learning goals from the lesson on addition and subtraction that were connected to the video that we just looked at. And in MathUP, it says the students are going to use student-generated strategies to add two-digit numbers. They're going to add using a more conventional algorithm. They're going to use a variety of strategies, and then they're going to subtract using the algorithm. So those learning goals, they don't specifically align with the outcomes in Saskatchewan. What they align with are the indicators in the Saskatchewan curriculum. So when you go into your indicators, that's where you see the alignment between the learning goals in MathUP and then the indicators in the Saskatchewan curriculum. So if you're saying that that's how those align, and so it's easier to understand when you realize, oh, I'm not just looking at the outcome, I'm looking at the indicators there. And because you're looking at the indicators, you might be using multiple lessons to address an outcome or multiple topics to address an outcome, which is kind of what the path activity reflected as well. What I want to bring your attention to is to the going back and going forward. So when I click on this, you'll notice grade 2 is in the middle. So it tells you what the kids should have learned in grade 1, and it tells you what they will be learning in grade 3. So we're just going to watch a quick little video look at this document here.
We've provided going back, going forward charts for each topic. The purpose is to help you in a variety of ways. One is to help you be aware of what expectations you might have that students come to you with this knowledge because they met it in an earlier grade, or that students go forward to this topic so that you can think about that as you're instructing them and somewhat prepare them for that topic. It could be useful if you're teaching a split grade. You have a 1-2 split and you want to know what the 1 should do versus what the 2 should do in a particular topic area so that you can teach them somewhat together. And the going back, going forward chart can help you with that.
You can use the going back and going forward that's embedded in MathUP. So it'll always tell you what was in the previous grade or the prior grade. So what should they come to you knowing, and then what you're responsible for teaching them, and then what they're going to do in the next grade. Lots of times, what the language that's used around these tools is called a scope and sequence, or it's a progression or a continuum. And so the ministry has designed one of these for K-9 in Saskatchewan, and it addresses all the strands. So I'm just showing you this one here. So you can see, right, this kind of, this is connected to the comment that I made before. You can see right here how, where is it? Where they start adding up to 20, and now they're up to 100 and then 1,000. So you can see how the magnitude changes even though the concept continues throughout multiple grade levels. And so these are really powerful documents because it helps you to understand kind of where you need to pick up and how far you need to get the kids. Lots of times when teachers aren't spending a lot of time in curriculum, and they're following more of a resource and they're not really looking at scope and sequence documents. So like you can go into a grade 6 classroom and all they're responsible for is teaching improper fractions and mixed numbers, and you might see them teaching equivalent fractions, you might see them teaching mixed numbers and impropers, and then you might start seeing them teach like adding. And so these documents are really important so that you understand what you're responsible for. They also help you to differentiate a little bit. Like if I see a student and I'm recognizing that there are gaps there or they're not at grade level, I get a sense of how I need to slide back and where that gap may have started. It kind of gives me an idea. So they're useful that way as well. So now we're going to look at assessment.
Gathering assessment data is an important part of a teacher's role. So we took that into account as we prepared materials for MathUP. We know that teachers gather assessment data through observations, conversations, and products. So we made reference to those places where you would gather all of that kind of data. We attended to what are commonly called the three parts of assessment. There is assessment for learning, which is to inform instruction. There is assessment as learning, where students learn to assess themselves, monitor themselves to help them become better at learning. An assessment of learning, where teachers are gathering data in order to report somehow, whether to a parent or to the system, how students are doing. So all of those things are attended to in a variety of ways. In particular, when looking at the topic planning pages and at the lesson planning pages, there is specific attention to assessment that you might look at as you're getting ready to do a topic or to do a lesson. And of course, you will see in every topic the section of the topic on the dashboard called Assessment of Learning, which includes much of this data.
Okay, so there's a few things that are interesting there. The way Marion has this set up is that every topic begins with a diagnostic task. And in those diagnostic tasks, she's sometimes it's a pen and paper assessment, so it's product driven. Sometimes it's an observation, so she has the kids engaging in a task where she's just kind of watching what they're doing, and then based on her observations or that pen and paper assessment, pre-assessment, she's making she's kind of making mental notes about how she may need to meet certain kids where they're at, and that can be done in small group instruction and in different ways. But you'll notice every single lesson has a diagnostic task at the beginning, and the purpose of that is to figure out where kids are at. So that's a form of formative assessment or assessment for learning. Assessment for learning, the formative assessment is basically teaching, right? It's that back and forth. You're watching a child, you're noticing something, you're responding. Maybe the child gives something back to you, you give them an open-ended question. So formative assessment is typically teaching. Is kind of how I explain to kids. You'll notice that she puts a lot of emphasis on the triangulation of data. So she's really encouraging you, especially in those, as well as in those diagnostic tasks, like to use conversation, observation, and product. And so I've talked in the provincial holistic rubric workshop about documentation tools and how we can use those. They have all the indicators listed, and if I'm seeing an indicator, I can mark the date off there, and then I can use that as summative assessment later on. The only thing that differentiates the formative assessment and the summative assessment is my audience. So formative assessment is to inform my teaching. Summative assessment, I'm sharing with a broader audience, parents, sometimes the ministry, the division, whoever it may be. It's an audience beyond my classroom. And summative assessment has time parameters attached to it. So for example, in elementary, we have 3 reporting grades. In high school, there's the midterm or the mid-semester and then end of semester. Formative assessment, it's not time bound the way summative assessment is. So with that being said, I can use formative assessment strategies for summative assessment. So I can use conversations and observations in both my formative and my summative. So I'm just going to show or share with you here. These are some rubrics that I really like, and I've been sharing them a lot as I've been meeting with teachers. I'll show you the grade 2 ones. So the reason why I like these is because, number one, they were created in Saskatchewan, so they're aligned with our curricula. The indicators of the rubric are basically the indicators of the curriculum. But basically what happened is groups of teachers came together and they had conversations about which indicators do we feel best demonstrate understanding of these particular outcomes. And so kind of what I like about these is when you're able to look at an outcome and it's unpacked for you and you start looking at those individual indicators, it drives your teaching deeper. It makes you think, oh, did I actually teach that part? Like I may have taught with the pictures, but am I teaching all three, or did I teach the estimation part? And so a rubric is a really nice assessment tool, but it also helps you to reflect on your teaching as well. Am I unpacking that outcome enough for kids so that they can get a deep conceptual understanding of it? And so that's what these look like. What I found in MathUP is when you look at, Marion has tools in there for conversations and observations as well. I find that they're kind of heavy is kind of how I describe them, which means there's a lot packed into them. I've made ones that are that align with the rubrics. There's a picture of one here, and they're very specific so that you're looking for very specific things. The ones in MathUP, they kind of have 2 or 3 indicators embedded in one observation. And so a student might have one of those indicators, but they might not have the other 2 or 3 in that particular observation that she's looking for. And so I find that might be challenging for teachers. And so if you're looking for tools for conversations and observations, just send me an email and I'll share those with you. Okay, so now what we're going to do is you can see how MathUP, it has your path, so that's your year plan, and then your topics are kind of each of your outcomes, I guess would be the best way to describe it, even though we're sometimes looping back to outcomes. But each lesson is a 3-part lesson, okay?
How to navigate a 3-part lesson in grades 1 and 2. Today, let's talk about how to navigate a 3-part lesson in grades 1 and 2. As you may remember from our video on how to navigate a topic, there are between 2 and 6 3-part lessons in each topic in MathUP. In the grade 1 patterns topic, for example, there are 3 lessons. Once you've opened a lesson, you'll see the lesson navigation bar under the lesson's title. The lesson navigation bar allows you to easily move through a lesson by clicking on the name of the part you wish to access. There is a planning page, followed by the Minds On, Action, and Consolidate parts. The 4th part, Your Turn, follows Consolidate and is meant to provide opportunities for individual or groups of students to practice and apply new learning. Notice that the Lesson Part tab turns color so you know where you are. Now let's take a look at each part of the lesson. First, we have the lesson planning page, which features a projectable and shareable student learning goal, as well as detailed curriculum information and an overview of assessment opportunities in the lesson. In this lesson sidebar, you'll find a place to add your own personal notes, the learning goal in teacher language, a link to the success criteria page, a link to the Sum It Up page, a list of materials and tools, including links to reproducible pages, and a link to the supporting activities, and sometimes a digital game for each lesson. Now let's open the Minds On part of the lesson. Minds On is usually an open question intended to activate prior knowledge, engage student thinking, and prepare students for the main action task. In MathUP, you have several options for sharing or projecting student pages. You can choose to display or project the student-facing pages by clicking on the Project button. Notice that the sample answers are not visible to students when you're in the project mode. You can also choose to use the Get Link feature when you want to share content with students electronically. When you click on this icon, simply copy, paste, and post the link to where students can access it. Notice that you can share the student-facing pages for the entire lesson, or just this page alone. Action is the main part of a lesson, during which students use critical and creative thinking and mathematical reasoning to solve a problem cooperatively. In addition to the project and Get Link features, there are two other ways you can share student-facing pages. When you click on the PDF icon, you are brought to a downloadable and printable version of the student content. When you open the Add Edit document, you can download and modify the content to meet your students' needs. The Consolidate part features questions that are designed to allow students to share their learning and bring out the main ideas of the lesson through discussion and reflection. Following Consolidate, you will find Your Turn, a fourth part which offers opportunities for students to practice and apply their learning. In grades 1 and 2, the Your Turn part includes What You Learned, which is intended to remind students of the learning goal and provide an opportunity for them to talk about one new thing they learned in the lesson. And a link to 4 different types of supporting activities and sometimes a digital game. These activities and games provide opportunities for assessment for learning, reteaching, practice, application, communication, reasoning, and problem solving. Let's open up the first type of activity in this lesson, an assessment for learning opportunity called I Know About Translating Patterns. In MathUP, you have the flexibility to choose which questions you want to share with individual or groups of students. When you want to share the question with students, ensure the toggle button is marked as visible. If you don't want to share the question, slide the toggle button to hidden. For example, let's say I want to share only question 1 with students. I'll slide the toggle button for remaining questions to hidden. Then I'll click on the Project or Get Link icon. Now only the first question is visible to students. When you are teaching, you'll likely want to move from one student page to another without having to go back through the instructional pages. Here's how you can do that. In Project mode, click on the chevron next to the title to reveal a drop-down menu of the student pages in the lesson. In this case, we're on the Learning Goal. Click on any student page you wish to display or project. For example, I'm choosing to go to the Minds On student page now. We hope this helps you to easily navigate a 3-part lesson in grades 1 and 2 MathUP.
Okay, so the idea of the 3-part lesson is really important. And so this graphic that's on the slide right now is from, this one is from Saskatoon Public, and what they're doing is they were looking at a balanced instructional framework or a balanced instructional model. And so they were actually when this graphic was created, and it was created a few years ago, they were using the idea of Minds On. And so a Minds On is just like the video said, it's typically open-ended so that all kids can engage. It's pretty soft, it's pretty safe. There's multiple answers. Some will be more sophisticated than others in the strategies that are used, but it's intended just to kind of, slowly and gently pull children in. And then in the lesson part, that's kind of where the teaching happens. And so in MathUP, that's called the action piece. Now, in that video, they said in the action piece, children are expected to use critical and creative thinking to solve a problem cooperatively. And so you'll notice in that action piece, it's literally scripted for you. But you're not telling kids what to do. You're kind of facilitating an experience for them so that they are using their critical and creative thinking and their logical thinking to make meaning themselves. And that's super important that they're able to do that and that they're able to have those experiences, because that helps with retention as well, rather than the teacher just giving them an algorithm or giving them the meaning that they should have. So your role when you use MathUP is slightly different than when you would be using a more traditional resource. You're acting as a facilitator in that action piece, or you're guiding. And so they'll give you very specific questions as you work your way through that action piece. Like I said, it's scripted. Sometimes it says you may ask this depending on your observation. You may do this depending on what you see your students do. So it's trying to embed some responsiveness in there as well. So you're not always modeling, you're kind of giving the children the opportunity to figure things out, and then you're responding based on what the children are giving you. And then in the consolidate part, you'll notice it's way up in this graphic on the upper left-hand side. When you're consolidating, when you're doing the action part, you're watching all of the different strategies that the students are using or sharing. So like those inventive strategies that she was talking about earlier, I'm watching the students and all of the different inventive strategies that are coming out. What I'm doing in my mind during this time is I'm sequencing those for the sharing in the consolidation. And how I'm sequencing them is from least efficient to most efficient. So for example, if we were doing two-digit addition and I had a child who was working with base 10 blocks, and then I had a child who was working on a place value mat and maybe just drawing sticks for the tens, that's a little bit more efficient. And then maybe I have a student who's working with the algorithm, and then I have a student who's doing it mentally. They would all be working on adding during that action piece. But then when we go to the consolidate piece, like I said, I'm sequencing from least efficient to most efficient. So all students are sharing, but my job is to sequence those appropriately and then to kind of facilitate a conversation with the kids about efficiency and why efficiency is important in math. One of the things that I would recommend, and I know it's very challenging during COVID, and I acknowledge that, is you have your minds on, your action, and then your consolidate. I would embed some small group instruction after my consolidate. So what I'm hoping to get from that in my small group is, how did that lesson land? How did that action piece land with each of my students or in my small groups? In the action piece, did I notice lots of kids using manipulatives? Can I put those kids in a group? Can I put the kids that were using the 100 or the place value chart in a group? And then when I go into finish up my consolidate, put them into small groups, and I want to see if I can nudge the learning along at that point in time. And then the your turn is kind of like the more traditional worksheet textbook type work. And so just like all of those features, you can print them off or you can share them electronically. And yeah, so your turn is it's the more traditional way of doing things. And you're checking in and you're seeing it's your assessment piece, essentially. Now, this is one that that I've been playing with, and it's based on the Saskatoon model, and kind of around the outside, you can see it's a little bit different, and it's reflective of kind of how SAS Math has been organized. And then what I was telling teachers is, when you look at this, kind of you should see a clock. And so if you see, because you can see the circle and you can see the clock, if you notice, the biggest part of that clock, half of it, is the elaborate, and you'll notice that there's small group and guided math in there. And then you'll notice on the left-hand side there, the explain part, where I might be using some direct instruction, is minimal. So I'm not spending all of my time at the front of the room teaching. I'm spending some of my time there, but then I need to know how that landed with kids. And that's where the majority of my time is spent, is, okay, what did you take from me? How did you make meaning from that? And how can I nudge you along? Okay, so they alluded to this, the supporting activities in that previous video. We're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that.
For each grade 1 and 2 lesson, we've chosen to provide you with a number of supplementary activities that you can use. One of the activities is essentially an assessment for a learning activity, just to make sure everyone is where you think they are. One of them is what we'll call a reteaching activity to help strugglers who didn't quite get it through the first run through. But many of the other ones have different purposes. So there's a number of teacher-led activities, some of which might involve literature, because it's nice to read kids' books that have math in them, and we've given you some suggestions, and that might be something that you want to do with a group of students or your whole class. We've also provided independent activities for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's just that you want to set up centers for students to have more opportunities to engage in the learning goal for that lesson, and you set up those centers on a different day than you're teaching a three-part lesson. And those centers could be games, or they could be digital games, or they could be based on manipulatives, or they could be sheets that kids fill out. There's all kinds of different things, and those are more independent. You might actually use some of those independent centers or activities for students who finish quickly. We all know that in any classroom, students finish at different times. And you have a student who's finished rather quickly, and it might be valuable to have already set up a center where that student can go, where the materials they need are available, where the instructions for them are perhaps pre-recorded so they can hear them, so that they have something to do while the other kids are still working.
One of the things I failed to mention in the three-part lesson, in the action part 2, if you scroll down at the bottom, this is really important. If you scroll down at the bottom, there will be there's a couple things there. It tells you the common misconceptions. So it's saying, if you see this, respond this way. So it's telling you that. And then it's also telling you how to differentiate. So it's saying if you need to slide back a grade level, this is how you're going to do that. If you need to move up a grade level, this is how you're going to do that. So it tells you right there how you're going to differentiate, which is super helpful for teachers. So it's not so taxing on them to, you're not really planning for 3 levels anymore if you were teaching a single grade, because Marian's done that work for you. Okay, that being said, when you jump over into the games, the puzzles, and the supporting activities, Marian kind of said exactly what I think needs to be said here. You want to utilize these as stations so that you can get that time for your small group instruction. And so like she said, you might use them for a student who finishes quickly, which is fine too, but it's just understanding what your intention is. So you can use these in lots of different ways. I think it's great to use in a small group instruction type situation, because then you're not searching in all of these different places to build all of these different stations. They're right there. Now, another really cool thing that I've been sharing with teachers is if you go into Blackboard, and if you want this link, I can send it to you too, because it's kind of tricky to find. Whoops. And I go right here. So I'm just on the curriculum page right now. And I go into assessment resources, and I'm going to slide over here to the ESSP and go into math. The grade 1 and 2 ones are really well done. These were revised after the provincial holistic rubric was created. So these originally started as the SAS Common Math assessments, and then the rubric came out, and then they went back and they revised the SAS Common Math assessments. And this is the work that came out of it. And so that's not, all of them are kind of set up the same. So they'll always have they always have this blurb at the beginning, and it tells you, you know, you can use these in different ways depending on what your intention is. And then it always has the outcome and the indicators, but then it has these really nice assessment pieces in there. And they're saying too that you can use these as tasks or as stations as well in your classroom. And you can literally just print these off. I think it recommends to the teachers, yeah, if you look under this task card envelopes label, it says print off these and then put them on like a big yellow envelope and then put the materials inside. You know, you could do it differently with baskets or however you choose to, but this is really nice work, and it's all aligned with the Saskatchewan curriculum, so you don't have to worry about that piece either. So if that's something that you're interested in, let me know and I will get those to you. So this is the last one here.
When I have the opportunity to talk to teachers about assessment, often they are thinking about what we refer to now as assessment of learning. This is about gathering data that you might use to report to parents or to the system, or to give a level or to give a mark. So this is usually summative. After students have learned something, you want to say, hey, did they learn it? as opposed to assessment for learning, where you're looking at things that might change your instruction. When you look at assessment of learning, there are different ways to gather that data. Sometimes it's through observations. So you might observe students and you might use our observational checklist to help you decide what to observe and keep records of some action that a student took or some words that a student said, and that might be part of your assessment of learning data. You also will have conversations with students, and those conversations will help you as well. Again, you don't have to keep a record of everything, but if there's something substantial, you might want to keep a little record, a little notation on this day, this happened, so that you can remember what happened and to have that as a piece of your data. As well, we have what is commonly called products. So students, it may be paper, but it may not be paper. It still might be a discussion. It might be a photograph. It might be all kinds of things. But it's a product that reminds you of what a student actually did. We've decided in MathUP to create things that we call skill questions and things that we call concept questions. And we've differentiated them because they are different. So math has a skill element to it, and we want to know if students have accomplished those skills, and we ask questions to find that out. For many topics, we also have something that we call a performance task. And the performance task is a single task that we think encapsulates a fair bit of the learning in the topic. It's not just one little piece of the topic. There are a few topics without such tasks because they just didn't feel right for those topics. But many of the topics will have that performance task. No teacher has to use all those pieces. Those pieces are there for teachers to select from to gather this assessment of learning data. One of the interesting things, I think, in MathUP is the use of parallel assessments. It's interesting to me that when a teacher gathers data about a student for the purposes of reporting, and perhaps students struggle with something, they might struggle for different reasons. They might struggle just because the numbers the teacher selected or the shape the teacher selected was a less comfortable or less familiar one, but they really did have the idea. Just in case that you want to know that, there are often parallel assessments, not always, which measure the same kind of ideas, but they measure them in a simpler way. So you can find out what the problems really are. Is it the details or is it the big pieces that students are missing? So that use of parallel assessments might be new and interesting to some of you. Often when we gather assessment of learning data, let's say we gathered it in October, and then we don't revisit that topic for a while or maybe even ever in that year. But all of a sudden in April, we actually, for some reason, see the kid actually knows this stuff now, even though they struggled with it in October. Many assessment experts would encourage you to ignore that October data and reassess that student, or perhaps you've actually already reassessed through observation and conversation, and use what we call the most recent and most consistent data to say, hey, this student really has accomplished this.
So you'll notice within this topic of adding and subtracting two-digit numbers, there's 4 lessons. So let's go into another way to add here. So there's the minds on, the action, and then the consolidate. And then there's this your turn piece. So like I said, this is kind of the more traditional piece right here. And you could put the link in a Google Classroom, you could project it, or if you scroll down a little bit more, there should be an opportunity. Maybe this one isn't designed that way. The ones that are able to be a PDF or a Word document, you'll have the opportunity to print those ones off, and that'll be right there too. So at the end of every lesson, there's a your turn piece right there. So you can use that as a more traditional pen and paper task. Like she said, you can also come along to these games and supporting activities here. You could use this one because it's saying independent. This one's independent. You could be using those as summative type assessments as well. But if I go right here, like I said, I have my topic, I have my diagnostic task or my pre-assessment, then I have these 4 lessons. Within each of these 4 lessons in the your turn part, this is where the kids are showing you but what they learned from this particular lesson. At the end of a series of lessons, there's this assessment of learning piece. And so that's what she was talking about in that video just now. And so here's the assessing skills and concepts. So if I go in there, she'll break things down into skill and then into concept. So what she's actually doing is when she's looking at the skill piece of it, she's looking at procedural fluency, which is typically connected to an algorithm. When she's looking at the concepts, she's looking at conceptual understanding. So do they actually understand what the numbers are doing or the relationship between the numbers depending on the concept? And so she's broken that apart so that she can figure out exactly what kids have and what they don't have. Now, when she was talking about the parallel assessments, that's where they are right there. You don't need to differentiate because she's done it for you. And so she often will use the language of softening a task. And that means that she's just making the numbers a little bit, like she said, simpler for kids to work with. So that's the parallel assessment right there. So if I'm teaching grade 4 addition and I have a student who's working at a grade 3 level, I'm going to use this parallel assessment rather than this one, which is for grade 4. I'm going to pick this one right here. Or for you guys, this would be a regular grade 2 assessment. This would be more grade 1 type work, or maybe there's not carrying and regrouping in this part, whereas there is in this part. And then lastly, I have the performance task. So the performance task is the application of the knowledge that the child has. And so you don't have to assign a performance task, but it's always nice to be able to see, can kids take what they learn and apply it in a new and novel situation? Lots of times when you look at grade level rubrics, kids need to be applying that understanding to be at grade level. Just so you're aware of that. And like they said, this is how easy it is to hide something. You just click. So if there's a question in there that you don't think is a good fit for your kids, or there's 1 or 2 kids that you don't want them to have it, you just click hidden. And then you can just turn them back on by doing that as well. Yeah, so procedural fluency is like the steps, the rules in math. But the thing is, I don't want to just teach procedurally. What I want to do is I want to start with conceptual understanding, and then I build procedural fluency upon that. So when you go back to that lesson where it's called Another Way to Add, so she's talking about kids using manipulatives and then using invented procedures and then transitioning to the algorithm. That's what she's doing there. She's like, okay, let's use the manipulatives to develop some conceptual understanding. What do you think you should do with these? And then let's transition you to the procedural fluency. So you always want to start with conceptual understanding and then move to procedural fluency. So that's what's going on there. And then there's one last thing that I want to share with you. I'm just going to jump back into MathUP. If you go into the activities here, so I can get to the games, puzzles, and supporting activities there. But there's also these brain benders, which would be really nice. If you have students who get done early, you could give them a brain bender. Or within here, I highly recommend, like, I'm a huge advocate of number talk. So I can go into grade 2. I can even narrow it by what I'm looking for in particular, and I can choose a number talk. So number talks are a super important way to get kids to share their thinking, and I can just click that and project it onto my smart board as well. And so the resource gives you the foundation to build a really rich mathematics program. So I'm just going to pop over here and we'll just finish up. I'm going to jump into the chat now. And if you have questions now or you want to unmute your mics, go ahead and ask me and I'll answer them. So just to make it clear, this year was kind of a soft start into MathUP. It was kind of a year to get comfortable with it and get familiar with it. And then come next fall, as Catherine mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this will be your core resource moving into the fall. Can students? No, you would have to, the way those games are set up, students can't access them, because if it were set up that way, each student would have to have their own account, like in Mathletics or like in Prodigy. It's not set up that way. It's set up so that you can take that link and you can copy and paste it into their Google Classroom. So it's not tracking data the way Prodigy or Mathletics is. They're just playing the game. That's a good question. I've had that question before. One of the things that I've spent some time doing over the past few months is with some staffs, I've done like a virtual tour of MathUp. So we spent a little bit more time in the resource, getting the teachers a little bit more comfortable with it. And then what I've done afterwards is I've gone out and I've modeled lessons for teachers using MathUp. So if that's something that you're interested in, just let me know. All that I ask from the teacher is that you tell me what concept you're working on, so that I'm not choosing something random to teach your kids and that it's connected to what they're actually learning. And sometimes I ask you to gather the manipulatives that I might need to teach the lesson. But other than that, I kind of come in and I model it. And a lot of teachers say that's really helpful, because then you're taking something that's a little bit more abstract and you're making it more concrete so they can see what it looks like. And like I said, if that's something that you're interested in, just let me know. If you're interested in the materials from Blackboard, that link is kind of tricky to find. So if you want me to email that to you, I can do that. I shared the documentation tools before. If you want those, or if you want the link to those rubrics, let me know and I'll get those to you as well. Kind of the purpose of this morning was for you to realize, and I know that I've said this before, but that you can build a really solid math program from MathUp. You have kids talking, you have them making meaning, you have them working with manipulatives, you have consolidation, which is a huge issue in math. You have various forms of assessment. There are very few resources that think about assessment instruction and responsive instruction, like differentiation, in them as well. Lots of times what you see in more traditional resources they're very cookie cutter. In the high quality resources, they all have embedded differentiation now. And like I said, they're all trying to build capacity in teachers, and they're looking at, using products, conversations, and observations in assessment rather than just looking at product. And so those are some of the reasons why MathUp was chosen, is because it has all of these really foundational pieces that help to build a strong math program. Yep, I will pop that link in there. Just give me 1 second to find it, Marlene. Whoops, that's not the one I want. Sorry, guys. I'll email it to you and I'll put it in the chat. I'm gonna stop here because I think once you open here, and then you'll have to just scroll down a little bit and then you'll see the grade 2 ones there. I have to email you the scope and sequence document, Naomi, because that one, I'm not sure exactly where you find that one online. So I'll just mark that down in my book right now. Did you take attendance? Oh, um, Jackie was just asking me to ask, is there anyone that is sharing that logged in as themselves but has someone who teaches the same grade watching the webinar with them today? And if you did, just pop it in the chat and let us know. Okay, I will make sure those people get that stuff. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to do one last call for questions because I want to make sure to be respectful of your time. If you later, a day or two from now, a week from now, if you realize that you need something that you didn't think of in the moment, or you need clarification of something, just let me know. And I would be more than willing to help you with that. The other thing, as I'm looking on here, I didn't mention about wonder tasks. Wonder tasks are Marian uses the language of wonder tasks. In the math community, it's usually the language of 3-act math tasks. Those are wonderful. And if you Google 3-act math tasks, there's lots of them available on the web as well. So it's another great feature in the resource. Okay, so if you guys feel that you have everything that you need and there's no more questions, feel free to log off, and hopefully we'll see you soon.